Well, I didn't really think about it. I just felt time to make a record. And so I made it. And, you know, sometimes things go right and sometimes they don't. This time it went right.
George Harrison may have been called the quiet Beatle, but when it came to his musical opinions, he was never shy about speaking his mind. Known for his deep spirituality and gentle humor, Harrison often appeared more reserved than John, Paul, or Ringo. But when reporters, fellow musicians, or even friends asked what he thought about certain trends or artists, he didn't sugarcoat it. If he loved something, he said so. And if he thought it was shallow, repetitive, or just plain bad, he didn't hesitate to let people know. In recent years, viral headlines have claimed that Harrison, at the age of 58, finally named the one musician he truly hated. That makes for a juicy clickbait story, but the truth is very different. Harrison died in 2001 at 58, and while he certainly voiced criticisms, he never narrowed them down to a single nemesis. What he did do, though, was deliver a series of sharp, sometimes brutal comments about specific artists and genres. In this video, we're counting down 6 real examples where Harrison dropped the quiet act and told the world exactly what he thought about his fellow musicians. Number 6, Neil Young.
All right, great, Richie Valens, bang, gone. They went at their peak. And that's the way everybody remembers him. And that's what rock and roll is all about, that edge, the peak, the thing.
George Harrison's reputation as the quiet Beatle often gave people the impression that he was endlessly polite and diplomatic. But in truth, Harrison could be cuttingly blunt when asked about music he didn't enjoy. One of the clearest examples came in 1992, during a casual chat with Bob Geldof, when the topic of Neil Young came up. Geldof, always eager to stir conversation, asked Harrison what he thought of Young's playing. Without hesitation, Harrison replied, "I'm not a Neil Young fan." Geldof pressed the issue, pointing out that Young was admired by many for his ragged but passionate guitar solos. But Harrison doubled down, going even further. "I hate it, yeah, I can't stand it." He didn't just leave it at that, he openly mocked Young's distinctive style. Harrison described Young's playing as good for a laugh, and recalled moments when he would exchange glances with Eric Clapton during a performance as if to say, "What's going on?" It's worth remembering that Neil Young has one of the most polarizing guitar sounds in rock. To some, his high-pitched solos and deliberately raw tone are a hallmark of authenticity. Messy but full of emotion. To others like Harrison, it sounded more like chaos than craft.
So that's a special song, Neil. You're going to be hearing, that song's going to be around for a while. And I'm saying to Joni, I'm saying, this guy.
Harrison's criticism was aimed squarely at the style, not at Young as a person. He simply didn't buy into the mystique of the ragged glory approach. What makes this quote so striking is how unfiltered it is. Harrison wasn't talking to a tabloid reporter or trying to shock an audience. He was chatting with a fellow musician, which suggests he really meant it. And unlike some of his other critiques, which were nuanced or softened with compliments, this one left no room for misinterpretation. He thought Neil Young's guitar work was unpleasant, even laughable. The irony, of course, is that both Harrison and Young were celebrated for their individuality. Harrison spent years pushing back against the Beatles' pop polish by experimenting with Indian instrumentation, slide guitar, and unconventional arrangements. Neil Young, meanwhile, became the poster child for grunge before the genre even existed, influencing bands like Pearl Jam and Nirvana. In a way, they were both rebels, but rebels in very different directions. Harrison's comments also underline his broader philosophy about music. It had to have melody, finesse, and soul. While Young's fans praise his raw energy, Harrison saw it as a lack of refinement. For him, music wasn't about thrashing away on a guitar until it screamed. It was about playing with precision, taste, and spiritual depth. Still, it's fascinating to imagine what a collaboration between the two might have sounded like. Would Harrison have softened his opinion if they'd worked side by side? Or would the clash of styles have made the tension unbearable? Do you think Neil Young's messy, emotional guitar solos are brilliant? Or do you agree with George Harrison that they're good for a laugh? Number 5, Oasis.
Right.
I've got to make all the tough decisions. Right? All the things about, like, you know, should we...
By the mid-1990s, Britpop had swept across the UK. Bands like Blur, Pulp, and Oasis dominated the charts, presenting themselves as heirs to the Beatles' legacy. No group leaned into that comparison harder than Oasis. The Gallagher brothers frequently invoked John Lennon as their guiding inspiration, with Liam Gallagher often styling himself as a modern-day Lennon in both fashion and attitude. For many, it felt like the Beatles' spirit had returned, but for George Harrison, the comparison was laughable and irritating. In a 1996 interview, Harrison cut straight to the point. The music lacks depth, and the singer Liam is a pain. The rest of the band don't need him. It was a typically blunt Harrison assessment, dismissing not only Oasis's songs, but also Liam Gallagher's notorious antics. Liam never wanted to back down, fired back on MTV, mocking Harrison as a middle-aged man who should leave his Zimmer frame at home. What could have been a quiet critique quickly escalated into a tabloid-friendly feud.
So Sally can wait.
Right, which is the truth? Did he write that lyric,
Yes,
or did you? Because
he said,
did. And he reckons I was, you know.
But he said, all right, let's just say, for argument's sake.
Right.
Harrison's words carried weight precisely because of who he was. When one of the Beatles, the band Oasis worshipped, brushed them off as shallow imitators, it struck at their credibility. Oasis prided themselves on bravado, but they clearly cared about being taken seriously in the lineage of British rock. Harrison, however, wasn't buying it. To him, Oasis's swagger was a distraction from music that lacked the substance and innovation he valued. Liam Gallagher's behavior certainly didn't help. By the mid-90s, his reputation for fights, walkouts, and outrageous statements was already overshadowing the band's music. Harrison, who had lived through the insanity of Beatlemania, saw through the act. He recognized the difference between Lennon's genuine wit and Liam's abrasive posturing. His remark that the rest of Oasis don't need him hinted at a belief that Noel Gallagher, the band's songwriter, was the real talent holding things together.
Fourth number, and the gig, for once, was like a really good atmosphere, because sometimes the atmosphere can be really sort of like hyper and charged and what have you.
Right.
And
what makes this feud particularly interesting is that Oasis desperately wanted validation from the Beatles, yet Harrison was the least likely Beatle to offer it. John Lennon was gone, Paul McCartney remained diplomatic, and Ringo Starr generally avoided controversy. Harrison, however, wasn't afraid to say exactly what he thought, even if it meant bruising the egos of the hottest band in Britain. The spat didn't last forever. Over time, Noel Gallagher admitted his band's obsession with the Beatles could be excessive, while Liam continued to throw insults in interviews long after Harrison's death. But the exchange stands as one of the clearest examples of how Harrison's honesty could spark chaos. He didn't hate Oasis as people, he just couldn't stand their music, or at least the hype surrounding it. Do you think Oasis deserved the Beatles comparisons, or was George Harrison right that their songs lacked depth and Liam was just a pain? Number 4, the Hollies.
That's Tony Hicks. This is Terry Sylvester, and we're on Sounds Unlimited, and we'd like to thank you for joining us. And Donny Sutherland was on as well, was he? Is he a good lad? He shared his part. Yeah. He's a good one.
In 1965, at the height of Beatlemania, George Harrison's songwriting was starting to blossom. He had just contributed If I Needed Someone to the Beatles' Rubber Soul album, a jangly, Byrds-inspired track that showcased his growing confidence as a composer. For Harrison, it was a personal song, and one he never intended for anyone else. But then came the Hollies, a fellow Merseybeat band from Manchester who were eager to ride the Beatles' coattails. They recorded their own version of the song and rushed it out as a single. Rather than being flattered, Harrison was furious.
We had a record going up in the charts in England recently, The Stars.
In an interview with New Musical Express that year, he didn't mince words. They've spoilt it. Technically good, yes, but that's all he went further, saying the Hollies sound like session men who've just got together in a studio without ever seeing each other before. And the harshest blow, their version is rubbish. I have not heard it since it was recorded. I don't want to. That was a brutal takedown, especially given the camaraderie expected among British invasion bands. Harrison wasn't just critiquing their cover, He was questioning the very soul of their music. To him, it sounded like an empty exercise in technique rather than an authentic expression. The comments stung. Graham Nash, then a member of the Hollies, later admitted the band felt blindsided by Harrison's rejection. After all, they admired the Beatles and thought covering Harrison's song would be an honor. Instead, it sparked one of the earliest Beatles-related feuds in British pop. Nash recalled years later that the harshness of Harrison's critique left the group demoralized. Why was Harrison so upset? Part of it was pride. If I Needed Someone was one of his earliest contributions to a Beatles album, and hearing it stripped of the subtle emotion he intended must have felt like a betrayal. But it also reflected his broader philosophy. For Harrison, authenticity mattered more than technical polish. The Hollies may have hit all the right notes, but to his ears, they missed the heart of the song. In retrospect, the feud seems almost quaint. Both bands went on to great success in their own right, and the Hollies are now celebrated for hits like He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother, and Long Cool Woman in a Black Dress. But the Clash is a reminder that even within the seemingly tight-knit British invasion scene, rivalries and bruised egos were very real. For Harrison, the incident also revealed his unwillingness to play nice just for the sake of diplomacy. He was the first Beatle to openly criticize another band in the press, setting a precedent for his blunt honesty in later years. What do you think? Was George Harrison justified in blasting the Hollies for their technically good but rubbish version? Or should he have taken it as a compliment that they wanted to cover his song at all? Number 3. The Sex Pistols and Punk.
That my father worked very hard and had a lot of tax taken off to support.
By the late 1970s, the music world had shifted dramatically from the days when the Beatles ruled the charts. Punk rock had exploded in Britain, with bands like the Sex Pistols and the Clash channeling the anger of a younger generation. They rejected the sophistication of prog rock and the polish of mainstream pop, favoring raw energy, sneering lyrics, and a DIY ethic. To many young fans, punk felt revolutionary. But to George Harrison, it felt like a musical dead end. In a 1979 interview with Rolling Stone, Harrison dismissed the entire punk phenomenon in one scathing remark. Just rubbish, no finesse in the drumming, just a lot of noise and nothing.
Couldn't have been more disgusting and pissed people off in such a way than to do something like that, because nobody thought of criticizing something as sacrosanct.
For a man who had come up in Liverpool's rough and tumble club scene, this wasn't a comment made from ignorance. Harrison knew what raw, gritty rock and roll was supposed to sound like. But to him, punk lacked the artistry and depth that elevated music into something more than noise. Harrison's criticism wasn't entirely without sympathy. He acknowledged that the bleak state of Britain's economy contributed to punk's anger. He recalled feeling sorry for young punks who said they were destined for factory jobs or unemployment. But where others saw punk as a necessary outlet for rebellion, Harrison saw it as negativity feeding on itself. You don't fight negativity with negativity, he explained. You have to overpower hatred with love.
Yeah, well, there's a blacklist
no,
down
you can't
there.
lose that way.
Our name's the top of the blacklist. As soon as any promoter puts you on, and they use the Sex Pistols, they take away the license for a day.
What's their specific objection?
That philosophy was consistent with the man who had immersed himself in Indian spirituality and wrote songs like Within You, Without You, and All Things Must Pass. For Harrison, music was meant to uplift, not to wallow in rage. To him, the Sex Pistols sneering no future on God Save the Queen wasn't brave, it was destructive. Of course, punk fans would argue the opposite. They saw Harrison and his generation as out of touch, clinging to an outdated ideal of love and peace, while ignoring the harsh realities of working-class life in 1970s Britain. The Pistols weren't trying to play finesse. They wanted to rip apart the establishment, musically and politically. Still, Harrison's dismissal carried weight. As a Beatle, his opinion symbolized the generational divide. The icons of the 1960s didn't understand or respect the anarchic energy of the late 1970s. And unlike Paul McCartney, who occasionally experimented with punk-inspired sounds and wings, or John Lennon, who at least admired its rebellious spirit, Harrison remained resolutely unimpressed. Looking back, the comment is fascinating not only for what it says about punk, but for what it reveals about Harrison himself. His spirituality had given him a lens of compassion, but also a distaste for aggression as art. Punk to him simply didn't offer solutions. Do you agree with George Harrison that punk was just noise and nothing? Or do you think the raw anger of bands like the Sex Pistols carried an important message that his generation failed to grasp? Number 2, Elton John.
Or the President of the United States.
Quite right. So I just perked. My mother went crazy. She hated it. Feel like steptoes, she said. Well, no one ever used it, but I mean, it's also the title of one of our songs as well.
By the mid-1970s, Elton John had become one of the biggest stars in the world. His flamboyant stage outfits, hit singles like Rocket Man and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and constant presence on the charts made him a global phenomenon. To many, he was the natural heir to the Beatles' mantle of pop dominance. But George Harrison wasn't impressed. In a 1976 interview, later quoted in India Today, Harrison praised Motown artists and singled out Stevie Wonder for his innovation and depth.
You didn't know you were poorly? No, I didn't, but I had a burst appendix.
But when the subject of Elton John came up, Harrison's assessment was far less generous. He bluntly said he didn't like Elton's music, describing it as formulaic. Throw in lyrics, throw in 4 chords, shake well, and there it is, the new Elton John super hit. For Harrison, Elton's songs seem more like a production line than genuine artistic expression. He respected Elton as a performer and as a person. Sources note he made that distinction, but he found the music repetitive and lacking in the sincerity he valued. In Harrison's eyes, pop songs should come from the soul, not from a hit-making formula. The critique reveals a lot about Harrison's personal taste. Even at the height of the Beatles, he had been the one pushing for more experimentation, more spirituality, and deeper meaning in the music. He loved Smokey Robinson because of his emotional honesty. He admired Bob Dylan because of his poetic depth. Compared to those influences, Elton's catchy choruses and radio-friendly polish seemed shallow. It's important to remember that Harrison wasn't alone in this view. Critics in the mid-70s often debated whether Elton John was a pop genius or simply a master craftsman churning out product for the market. Harrison, ever the seeker of sincerity, clearly leaned toward the latter interpretation. Of course, Elton John has long proven his staying power. His catalog spans decades, and his reputation as one of pop's greatest entertainers is now cemented. Interestingly, Elton himself admitted in interviews that during the 1970s, he sometimes felt like he was running on a treadmill, producing albums at a frantic pace to meet demand. That very treadmill-like quality may have been exactly what Harrison picked up on, the sense that the music machine was spinning too fast for genuine artistry. Despite his blunt criticism, Harrison never expressed personal animosity toward Elton. He wasn't attacking the man, but the formula he believed defined his output. And in that distinction lies Harrison's broader philosophy. He could admire an artist's talent and success while still questioning whether their work carried the authenticity he prized. Elton never publicly fired back, perhaps wisely choosing not to fuel a feud with a Beatle. Instead, history has allowed both legacies to stand. Elton John remains beloved for his showmanship, while Harrison is remembered for his integrity and unwillingness to flatter music he didn't respect. What do you think? Was Harrison too harsh in dismissing Elton's music as all sounding the same? Or was he simply pointing out a truth about the formula-driven nature of 1970s pop? Number 1. Beyond the critiques, Harrison's enduring influences. For all the sharp words George Harrison occasionally aimed at other artists, it's crucial to remember that he wasn't defined by negativity. At his core, Harrison was a seeker of authenticity, constantly drawn to music and musicians who expressed something genuine. His criticisms of Oasis, Elton John, punk rock, or Neil Young were rooted not in
Maybe not every day, but I do. Although I haven't
personal animosity, but in a deep conviction that music should come from the heart. Just as telling as the artists he dismissed are the ones he praised and cherished throughout his life. Harrison frequently cited Smokey Robinson as one of his all-time favorites. He once admitted he had written 2 songs about Robinson, a testament to how deeply the Motown legend's voice and songwriting touched him. For Harrison, Smokey embodied sincerity. His songs weren't just catchy, they carried emotion and soul that Harrison believed was missing from so much pop music. Similarly, Stevie Wonder captured Harrison's admiration. He called Wonder's music inspirational, noting how it uplifted him even in difficult times. Both artists represented what Harrison valued most: depth, heart, and truth. No figure loomed larger for Harrison than Bob Dylan. Their friendship was one of the most enduring connections of Harrison's career. Tom Petty once recalled that Harrison would secretly tape Dylan playing piano during informal sessions, then spend all night listening to the recordings in awe. That image, Harrison, the former Beatle, sitting like a student absorbing Dylan's every note, reveals how much reverence he felt. When the traveling Wilburys came together in the late 1980s, it was Dylan's presence that made the project magical for Harrison. Unlike the dismissive tone he took with others, Harrison's comments about Dylan were filled with gratitude and admiration. Even in classic Hollywood, Harrison found role models. He loved Bette Davis's intensity on screen, praising her ability to inhabit a role so completely that she became unforgettable. In music, he looked for the same quality: performers who gave everything of themselves and left an indelible impression. It's telling that Harrison never claimed to hate anyone in absolute terms. Instead, he pitied shallow music or dismissed acts he thought lacked substance. Yet when he loved something, he expressed it just as strongly. His duality, cutting in critique but glowing in admiration, paints a fuller picture of who he was. He wasn't bitter or perpetually cranky. He was discerning. Ultimately, Harrison's enduring influences reflect a man who, despite fame and fortune, never stopped craving sincerity. His critiques remind us that he wasn't afraid to be unpopular if it meant telling the truth. And his praises remind us of the artists who inspired him to keep searching for meaning in music. Do you think George Harrison's strong admiration for Dylan, Smokey Robinson, and Stevie Wonder balanced out his criticisms? Or do his blunt remarks about other artists stand out more in his legacy? So, did George Harrison ever sit down at age 58 and declare that he truly hated one musician? The truth is no. That headline was pure clickbait. What Harrison did do throughout his life was speak his mind, sometimes in ways that stung. He said Neil Young's guitar style left him cold. He dismissed Oasis as shallow and Liam Gallagher as a pain. He thought the Hollies butchered his own Beatles song, and he laughed off punk as nothing more than noise. Even Elton John, one of the most successful pop artists of the era, came in for criticism when Harrison accused him of following a formula. That duality is what makes Harrison so fascinating. He could be biting in his honesty, but also glowing in his praise. He wasn't interested in small talk or false diplomacy. He wanted music and the people who made it to mean something. And maybe that's why his own songs, from Something to All Things Must Pass, continue to resonate. They reflect the worldview of a man who demanded depth not only from others, but from himself.